Perfect. All right. Yeah, thank you for the introduction, Jake. It's nice to be in Boston. So one of the things that fascinated me about crypto is the ability to take something that to many people seems to exist in the ether and then tie it to something physical and tangible in the real world. And the way that we generally do this is by engineering or thinking about incentives in a way that amasses not only capital interest, but actual productive activity. So the general, I guess, meta framework for how this has kind of happened was probably prototyped by Bitcoin in the simplest manner, which is you have some amount of token emissions or inflation, which dilutes existing holders, but then is directed towards making the entire network more valuable by bootstrapping the productive use or the amassation of some resource. So it's this constant loop of new emissions generating something that is valuable, which then reinforces the value of what you're now emitting. In Bitcoin, the game is relatively simple. It is you're paying for security via hash power and computational effort. So the Bitcoin network is more secure when you've amassed a larger amount of computation that is validating transactions. Two computers validating Bitcoin versus the large amount of ASICs that we now have securing this network and, in some sense, this industry is a very different story. And a lot of it happened via bootstrapped kind of emissions and inflation. So that's one aspect. The second aspect is making it competitive. It's not sufficient to just inflate or emit a token in order to get people to do something. You also need to introduce some form of competition or adversarial, some form of an adversarial playing field in which participants have an incentive to either to grow and outcompete in a way that makes the entire network more valuable. In Bitcoin, we see this in the hash rate graph, which I think is one of the most amazing graphs that exists in this entire industry, because it just draws a very clear, precise line between emissions and computation coming together to amass a significant amount of energy and resource being and a network that has, in some sense, surpassed what would have been possible to bootstrap centrally over the same time period. It is the ability of a bunch of independent actors and parties to go out, get funding, and deploy on a network that allows you to bootstrap at scale. So the superpower to decentralization, at least in the deep-end context, is this idea that no single entity has to go out there and kind of fundraise or do any like specific activity to bootstrap something. You can get a bunch of individual parties who are competing with one another to do the same thing. So that kind of framing for crypto is kind of the founding insight for Glow. A lot of people say Bitcoin mining, while it is a great case study in emissions, incentives, and competition, is wasteful. That is a separate discussion and one that I'm not going to get into now. But the idea is, can you take that same framework or that same structure and then put it towards something that is energy generating rather than energy consumptive? And more specifically, can you take it and use it towards something that is not just energy generating from like a nominal perspective, but is targeted and generates something that what Glow cares about, which is climate impact, carbon credits. So we are taking energy that is produced and we would like to put it on grids in which you're displacing the most amount of carbon. That's kind of like the objective. If Bitcoin's goal was to just amass as much computation to secure a network, Glow's goal is to amass solar farms, both commercially and residentially, to displace the most amount of carbon. So it's like we're trying to take that same emissions and value structure, but just instead of the KPI being security, the KPI is now energy produced. So the kind of like naive approach to doing this, or the simplest approach, would just be, we create a network, we magically poof out a token, and then we just distribute it to solar farms based on how much energy they produce. And that, while that like at first glance might seem to recreate the Bitcoin game or recreate those same competitive dynamics, it doesn't. And there's a crucial difference between Bitcoin miners and solar farms, and that is that Bitcoin miners are only economically viable through their interaction with the Bitcoin protocol. There's no use for an ASIC, generally commercially, other than to mine that cryptocurrency, but the same thing is not true for solar farms. Solar farms can and are economically viable without the use of any new token incentive to bootstrap them. If you just give out token emissions to farms, what you would essentially be doing is diluting the power of your token to bootstrap new solar and just giving incentives or tokens to people who would have already done the activity anyway. Said differently, you have no counterfactual impact. You haven't done anything other than potentially enrich a group of people that would have already done the same activity, and diluted the power of your token to actually bootstrap a productive network. So this introduces that fundamental design challenge for Glow. How do you recreate the same emissions and ruthless competitive structure that exists in Bitcoin mining or other mining networks in crypto, but direct it in a way where you've created a demonstrable new impact, or you've introduced a larger amount of solar into the world that would have not existed already? And the short answer, which we'll dive into, is you have all farms give up their revenues. And that's a little scary, because it is, but it's not that scary when we think about how we do this in practice. So the way it works for Glow is that any new solar farm that comes onto Glow is required to post as collateral or deposit the amount of electricity revenues that they would receive from operating. So let's say you have a universe of farms. Each farms posts their revenue into the pot, and they compete with one another to earn that revenue back. So what that means is that, in general, if you are a highly competitive farm or a more competitive farm, you will not only earn your own revenues back, but you will earn the revenues that are forfeited from underperformers. Essentially, you take the universe of farms, stack rank them, have them all commit their revenues to a pot, and then redistribute accordingly based on impact. The question then is also, what does it mean to be competitive? And in the Glow world, what it means to be competitive is to be really efficient at producing carbon credits. So the most efficient producers of carbon credits, or the people that are producing carbon credits with the smallest amount of electricity revenue received, will now be receiving the outshared, or the lion's share of rewards from forfeitures from those who underperform. In this way, you've created the same kind of mining dynamics. And remember, the initial problem before was that solar farms are already viable. This now makes viability a direct function of how competitive you are, and not a function of how expensive or cheap electricity is on your local grid. The question now is, why does anyone play this game? Why would I even enter, though? This is a zero-sum game. All participants submit all of their revenues, and then that revenue is reshuffled or redistributed. But if I'm looking at this game, if I'm a really efficient farm, obviously I'd want to play. But the only reason I want to play is because less efficient farms also want to play. So how do you get people to play? And that's the token. So the token reward is the kind of the token reward is not the entirety of what a farm receives. It is just the thing that tips this game from a zero-sum revenue reshuffle to a positive-sum distribution to all players. So the reason I would play is generally if my expected revenues are the profitability conditions for a farm is just if your expected revenues exceed your expected costs. In the zero-sum games, on balance, they would roughly be equally balanced. So that is not sufficient to get more people to play. But if you get more people to play, then you now have a competitive arena where you can produce something that is valuable, which in the Glow case is carbon credits. So this is something that we call the competitive recursive protocol. The reason we do this, the reason we call it we think it's recursive in nature, is similarly to in Bitcoin, where you have this kind of ruthless cycle of people who outcompete are kind of crush out and push underperformers. And these people who outcompete are able to now reinvest and then continue to expand while underperformers are kind of weeded out. You have this feedback loop where the bar for being competitive continuously is upped as each round tends to strengthen the position of outperformers. They continue to receive revenues from underperformers, and underperformers who do not reach or don't meet the profitability conditions are just generally weeded out. So the framework is not something that can be applied to something more than just solar. It is still the fundamental mining framework that we understand in these competitive physical infrastructure networks. But the idea is you just have some skin in the game, some stake, whether that's purely financial or also actual physical infrastructure. Your performance is ranked and measured, and how much you recover or your rewards are directly related to your relative competition in whatever game you've set up, and then you earn rewards based on that as well. So this kind of structure is there are a lot of nuances to the way that the Glow works and is deployed across regions and across grids, but this core recursive competitive framework is the one that we kind of instantialize, is the instance that allows us to replicate mining frameworks in a slightly different environment, which is solar. I'm happy to take questions if there are any, but I hope that was kind of a nice little introduction to how we think about solar at Glow. Next. Hi. Yeah.
I don't know if you mentioned this, but what blockchain are you using? Is this a Bitcoin sidechain or?
We're built on top of Ethereum mainnet.
Okay, with Ethereum moving from GPU to margin, how did you do that?
So what secure state on Ethereum is stake instead of work, but you can just instantiate your protocol on top of Ethereum, which is what Glow does. So the Glow token, its smart contracts are built on top of Ethereum, and this is kind of just the architectural underpinning for the protocol itself. To answer your question, solar mining or solar farms, the amount of solar doesn't determine how much consensus weights you have. It determines your reward, if that's where your question was going. Hello.
How's it going, Vic?
Good to see you, sir.
Great to see you too. How do you deal with the problem of the efficiency of the farm, being really a function of geography, where if you set yourself up in New England,
yep,
you're not getting as much sun as Southern California?
Yeah, that is the core problem or insight for Glow, which is if I put a farm in Rajasthan, India, for example, which has high solar irradiance and also a fairly dirty grid, I will simply blow any competitor that tries to put up solar out of the water. And that is what makes Glow, like on face, that's why I said there's some nuances, but that's what makes Glow on face kind of like a singular game where you kind of push all the participants to one shelling point, for lack of a better word. So that's when you have a global game. But what you can do is set up regions in which now you have the similar, let's say you set up a New England region where all the farms now compete within a similar, let's say, geographic or grid constraint. Then you've kind of isolated these players from the global game where they would simply have no chance, to one where now it's the same kind of competitive game, just localized. And that is actually what's happening in the next version of the protocol, which we're releasing, which is a Glow V2. I wanted to talk about that, but there's simply not enough time. But the idea was exactly that. We noticed that you have that singular outcome. How do you create the same competitive game and expand the scope of who can play?
Yeah, so with right here. Hey, how's it going?
Hello.
With this competitive game, people would obviously be incentivized to cheat, right? And so I'm curious of how you're handling the Oracle problem. You have something that's being generated off-chain. How do you get that on-chain in a verifiable way where they're not changing their data of their revenue or changing the data of the amount of electricity that they're changing?
Yep, great question. Another thing that could be a whole workshop in and of itself, but the short answer is that solar farms are large static pieces of infrastructure. So what that generally means is that every farm is audited prior to being onboarded onto the protocol. And the inputs that generally determine your carbon credits are how dirty your grid is that you're plugging into, how much energy you produce to displace carbon that would have been emitted, and the general like weather patterns or irradiance that you have, and the quality of your panels. All of these inputs are generally known at build time, and so when you put up a farm, you are able to audit what they're kind of expected to produce over that lifetime, and the majority of the costs happen at build time as well. So in order to like, the rationale to cheat is because you can mitigate some costs while receiving the same rewards as if you had done the thing you had said you had done. But in order to do the thing, at least in solar, you have to go through you have to go through all the capital intensive processes first, which means that you can audit these farms at build time instead of like constantly monitoring performance. But we also do constantly monitor performance as well, just to verify that our expected outputs are similar to the realized ones. That's a short answer. There's a longer one that I'm happy to take offline, but.
Could you comment on low token economics and if the carbon credits like buy down tokens or support the tokenomics in any way?
Yeah, so that's like the. Okay, I guess not. Yeah, so that's like the core thing here, right? Is like the emissions framework of inflation creating value, which then makes the whole thing, the inflation itself more valuable. So the short answer is yes, the value from the carbon credits are what people who want to buy carbon credits or people who want to buy the whatever, it's not just carbon credits, it can be any impact credit. Whoever wants to steer tokens toward a region and collect those impact credits are kind of the customers that are making the Glow token itself. I would say.
You don't centrally buy down tokens.
No, there's no. It's not like a buyback and burn mechanism. That's not the loop. It's more just people coming in desiring the ability to either steer the token or collect some impact credits. Yep.
So with Bitcoin, obviously the goal, at least now, is scarce money. So if Bitcoin goes up in value, you don't want people to be able to just excavate as much Bitcoin as they can, more than what exists. They can't get more Bitcoin than
Yeah.
what's going to exist.
Yeah.
With gold, if the price goes up, they can get more gold than they would have gotten out of the earth by trying harder, getting more technology or whatever. With this, I assume the goal is to encourage more infrastructure in solar. So therefore, do you move Bitcoin where, too bad you can't get more Glow even if you create more infrastructure, you're just competing for what there is? Or is it like we want to encourage more infrastructure so we actually allow more emissions the way it would be with gold if you try harder?
Yeah, good question. So the goal isn't scarcity, scarcity of the asset. So we emit a steady amount each week. It's fixed. About 185K tokens are emitted per week, and that happens in perpetuity. Any other questions? Great.
Question
Oh,
here.
yeah,
So because it happens in perpetuity, you have no hard cap, is that correct?
yeah.
So how would that impact the value long term as the number of coins far exceed the infrastructure being built? Does that now begin to devalue the whole ecosystem, or how would that?
Yeah. So that happens when this loop fails to be more than positive zero sum, when it fails to be positive sum. For example, Ethereum doesn't have a cap either, but the bet is that over time, the value of what it secures, of what it stakes secures, and all the kind of utility that it brings is continually value generating and expansive, similar to something like Glow.
Well, in the contrary, Ethereum has a burn mechanism, so the thing is that it offsets itself.
Yeah, so burn is the way that you take value and you put it back into the protocol to make inflation sustainable. But burn is not the only mechanism to do so. There are other ways that you can continually generate value and then support the tokenomics to be sustainable. And the way that Glow does that is, I don't want to give there are two ways that it does that. One is in the current version of the protocol, which we're just about to change, so I don't want to give that answer at the moment because it's a little outdated. But I'm stay tuned. If you want to know more about Glow, I should have put like a link or something here, but it's just glow.org. Has a bunch of the things on the tokenomics, white papers, other stuff that we've been writing.
What's the ticker?
GLW, but we are not listed on like Coinbase or an exchange. But you can find again, stay tuned. new version of the protocol is launching, so it will have the proper GLW ticker on Uniswap. But glow.org for all questions for now, because I think I'm over time.
A little bit.
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you, Vic.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Let's
Thanks,
give it up
Jay.
for Vic. Appreciate it.